Hello, I'm Deborah and I'm an alcoholic. Would start out with what it's like. I grew up in an alcoholic family. My family, my dad, my mom, my grandmother, my grandparents, from the time that I was a little girl, I remember everybody drank. They drank a lot of beer too. I remember beer. I don't remember much about other alcohol. The only other alcohol I remember them drinking was moonshine. And that's because they all came from North Carolina, and my grandparents were from the foothills of North Carolina, and that's what they did. They ran moonshine. So everybody around me drank. So it was always interesting to me that as I grew up, all the way until the time that I got sober, nobody ever said to me, do you think you may be an alcoholic? Do you think you may have a problem with drinking? And I only suppose it's because everybody around me drank. So nobody thought anything was odd about what I was doing or identified. And, back then too, I always thought it was interesting that you really didn't see any advertisements on TV like you do today. You didn't have any treatment center advertisements, or, I didn't have any counselors at school that said anything to me about as many days as I missed at school. Somebody was talking about that in a meeting one day, or we were reading something that was shared in a meeting, somebody's story. It was at a ladies' meeting, and they were talking about how they didn't play sports. And I thought, my God, really the only thing that I ever did was barely exist throughout my childhood. I just went to school the minimum amount of days to get by. I didn't do any sports. I didn't do any school activities. And when I came home in the afternoon, it was like I was always waiting on the next bad thing to happen. I waited on my dad to get home, because when he was drinking, I never knew what mood he was going to be in. So you never knew. You could be sitting around watching TV, and you didn't know if it was going to be peaceful when he came home. Is he going to come in and sit down and watch TV with us and everything going to be okay? Or is he going to come home in a bad mood and everybody's going to scatter? There were 4 of us kids. I don't remember my mom drinking much when we were growing up, but I only remember my dad drinking. But with 4 kids, it was a lot of things going on all the time. And I was the oldest of 4 kids. So for me, I was the one that was responsible all the time to take care of these kids. And I couldn't take care of these kids. And I was the one that always got in trouble if they did something they weren't supposed to do. So, and another thing that used to happen is my dad was also violent when he drank. So 15, 16 years, I remember over and over and over again, periods of time where my dad would get mad at my mom, or my dad would get mad at one of my brothers, or mostly the brothers, my little brothers or my mom, and it'd start a big fight. And being the oldest, I turned into the one that would run and try to stop a fight. So I would either jump on my dad's back to try to stop him from hurting my mom, or I would run and in the room and try to deflect him from my brothers, or I would take everybody and say, go to the back, go in your room, lock the door, so I could just deal with my dad and my mom. And I mean, this started from the time I was 6, 7 years old. I remember one of the first times I did it. I ran on his back. I was probably 7, 8 years old. And that was my next 7, 8 years. I went like that, just time after time after time, till finally I hit like 15 years old. And and it got to the point to where it was so bad that I was sleeping with the knives under my pillow at night. Before I could go to bed, I would go into the kitchen and I would gather all the knives and hide them under my bed. And then one time he came home with that makes me not be able to sleep either. So that was not a good solution. And then one time he came home with a gun. And then I'm like, for God's sake, So I get this gun and I hide this gun, but it causes this really big commotion about where this gun went. So finally I had to give the gun back, but I think he got rid of the gun. And then finally one day I just said, I've had enough. And so I went to him one night and he was just standing there. I don't know what was going on with him. And I just said to him, you know what? I've had it. I've had it. I'm just telling you, you're going to have to go to sleep sometime. And I'm done with this. And I think I was about 15 then. I got my driver's license after that. And I don't really recall. I'm sure it didn't stop it. Maybe it curbed it a little, but right after that, I got my driver's license and I decided I'm going to be done with this. I can't take this anymore. I've decided he's having an affair. So I'm 16 years old and I get in my car and I drive all the way from here to the beach. You guys don't know where I'm talking about going, but it's like 15 miles from here. I'm 16 years old. I put my little sister in the car with me. We drive to the beach. We follow him. I see where he goes. I go and get out of the car. I look in the mailbox. I write the name down, come back home, and I tell my mom he's having an affair. Here's the name. Get rid of him. And she did. And here's where my drinking began. You would think I'm now set free. I can go to school. I can relax. I can have a good life. Everything. All of this responsibility is now off my shoulders. I don't have to take care of these kids anymore. I don't have to take care of my mom. And instead, first thing that I did was, I think it's probably the first weekend, somebody invited me, some friends from school. By then I was in high school, or at least junior high, 9th grade. Could have been 10th, but either way, I was 16 years old and these girls invited me to go spend the night with them. And we went to the beach with this group of guys. And I ended up drinking like 3/4 of a bottle of Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine. I drank that much by myself the first night. Blacked out. This is where, and this is in 1970. It doesn't start there and get better. And with the times that I was in 1970, I went that night. I don't remember hardly anything that night other than just, I was in blackouts most of the night. I came to every once in a while. Suppose I could have been having fun. At least to me, my whole goal from that point forward, I will tell you why I drank. I never tried to drink social. I never sat around even attempting to. I never thought about it, never tried to. My whole goal with drinking or whatever I did was to not think and not feel. That was my whole goal with anything that I consumed. And so these girls, I ended up throwing up, sick as a dog. And I told these girls, I will never do that again. That was horrible, horrible, horrible. And they said, Deborah, it's just that, they called me Debbie back then. They said, Debbie, it's just that drink that you drank. You don't need to worry about that. There is all kinds of alcohol and they don't all make you sick like that. You just need to try some different ones. So I thought about it and I thought, okay, well, I did only try one. Maybe it was this bad alcohol. I will try something else. So I set on this little quest of trying all these different kinds of alcohol. And I wound up with vodka because vodka is kind of not so bad taste. You can mix it with things. But then I decided that mixing it with all those things kind of, it's got too many calories for one thing. I wound on orange juice. And then I decided, you know what? I'm 16, remember? I decided that the quickest way to do what I wanted to do, because all I want to do is not think and feel, right, is just not to mix it with anything. So I'm 16 years old and I'm just throwing back shots. And that's where I started. From Boone's Farm to drinking shots straight. And it only went downhill from there. That's what it started out for me. And over the next 13 years, my life progressively just went down. I can't even, over the years, it just went bad, bad, bad. And then I ended up getting pregnant when I was 16, of course, had a wonderful little boy. And then I got me a job. You'll love this. I got a job at Jack's Liquors at a drive-through. where I met a husband who bought a fifth of Jack Black. So I had my own apartment. I was okay. And I meet this guy and he drinks. And not only does he drink, he's as bad as my dad or worse. So I jump out of the frying pan into the fire, so to speak. Just like they say, everything they said is true. So the next thing you know, for the next 9 years, I stay with this guy and progressively get worse. And just like in the story, Dr. Alcoholic Addict, I ended up finding out that I'd been having headaches since I was like 6 years old. I got diagnosed during that time with migraines and a form of epilepsy that just causes you to have headaches. And so they prescribed me pain pills and Valiums. So I'm doing pain pills, Valiums, and alcohol all together. And for the next 9 years, I'm gradually increasing, not too gradual, pretty fast, in how much I'm drinking and using, to the point that I would really say I don't hardly remember my 20s, because I started out I'm having to turn the computer back on so I can see the time. I had to start at where I started at 16. By the time I was 29 and came in the program, that was through my 20s. And I hardly remember them. It was just a blur of one bad thing after the other happening, to the point that at one time, the few things that happened, and my next part of my story with what happened is, my husband was ended up going to work as a security guard with the Salvation Army. And his boss was going to leave his job and go move all of his stuff back to Georgia. And when he did, he asked to help us bring his stuff up there with him, because he was going to have to drive a motorcycle, a car, a bunch of stuff. And so we helped move it up there, and he had this place on the river, and we went up there. And while we were up there that night, we all get drunk. And while we're asleep, he goes and molests my daughter. And during that same time, he threatened to kill my son. He chases them through the woods at night. And this is all while we're asleep, drunk, passed out. So it was during this time that this happened. Then when we got back, it was such a emotional horror that I really increased in what I was doing. I went off one night in the car and went over to visit a cousin of mine, left there, was in a blackout, and ran into some people head on in my car. And I got arrested, of course. And while I was arrested, I went back home. I was supposed to get a ticket and pay a fine. Went home, got in a fight with my husband, called the police. The police came. I had not paid my fine. They arrested me again. So I go back to jail. While I'm there, I was sick. So I couldn't do the urine test to show if I've been drinking or using or not. I pass out in front of the judge, and they take me to the P farm. So I end up having to stay in the P farm and to be able to get out the next day. So that whole period of time was just through a very short period of time. All those things happened to me. My daughter, I wrecked the car. I get arrested. I go home. That thing happened. I end up going back to jail. And I'm not a jail person. I don't like jail. Don't like metal, don't like being locked up. It's cold. There's no blankets. I didn't like the whole jail thing. So that was a beginning of my bottom right there. And then right after that, we got so broke that I ended up having to move to Tallahassee. My husband was up there in college. And while I was up there, my mom died. And my mom had been keeping my son. This is all my bottom. I'd lost my kids. My daughter is with my husband's sister. My son is with my mom. My mom died. I'm at the bar at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm having to give blood to be able to buy alcohol. I leave the bar at 9 o'clock in the morning after I'm drinking, and somebody stops me and says, your mom died. So I go back to Jacksonville, go to her funeral. My husband comes with me, and he says the worst thing he could ever say, and that was that your mom, I don't know why you're crying, your mom didn't love you anyway. And for me, that was pretty much it, because we ended up going back to Tallahassee after that. And that night we went to, we got in an argument. He went to go and he went to hit me, and my son got in front of him. And he said, don't hit my mom. And when he did that, it was a spiritual awakening to me. And the thought that popped in my head was, how could you do that to your own kids when you always wondered how your parents could love you, how your mom could love you, and stay living in that situation that she lived in? And I ended up hitting him on the head with an iron, knocked him out, called the police. The police came and got him, and my brother came and picked me up. He said, Deb, I'm going to pick you up this time, but it's the last time I'm going to pick you up. He brought me back to Jacksonville. And I had my next spiritual awakening. Some people at the church took us in that I'd grown up in. I was staying at their house. I had a terrible headache because I went completely, stopped everything at that time. And I remember thinking at the time that I have a prescription of Valiums I can go pick up at the pharmacy. And the next thought popped in my head was, alcohol and drugs has been the cause of all your problems. And I ended up thinking to myself right then, I'm not going to go pick that up. And I went to church. The people at the church helped us get an apartment. They gave us money for food. I got a job. And then I ended up meeting, this is where God, when I got my thinking right on accepting that I was an alcoholic and that I had a problem, even though I still didn't know what an alcoholic was, God sent the person. Because I was at church and had somebody come to church from AA. I actually had a Bible study at my house, and this guy came to the Bible study, and he says, you know, you look like you've never done a thing wrong in your life. And I told him little recap about my life, about what I'd been like drinking. And he goes to tell me that if ever I drink again, he says, you may be okay right now, but if you ever drink again, here's what will happen to you. You will go back and drink again, but worse than you ever did before. And he told me about AA. And so right after that, I went to like a meeting or two, just checking it out, but I hadn't started drinking yet. And then I didn't see this guy anymore. He just was somebody checking the church out. He was out checking the church. He said he was growing in his spirituality or something, and he wanted to, he was going around checking out churches. Well, guess what? I ended up being around some other people at church who told me they thought it was okay for Christians to drink, because up to that time, I did not think it was. The church I grew up in did not believe that. So one night, I ended up ordering a drink and drinking part of a drink. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I can't be an alcoholic, because I don't see how an alcoholic could only drink half a drink. But I know exactly what happens now when a person takes a drink, an alcoholic, because here's what happened to me. It was just like somebody turned on a light switch. Up to that point, I had not thought about it. I had not wanted it. The desire was completely gone. The compulsion was completely gone. I was okay. My life was moving along. I was happy. I was doing well. And as soon as I took that drink, all the time, all I could think about was, when's the next socially acceptable time I could have a drink? And with a short amount of time after that, I was picking up drink after drink after drink, until the next thing that happened to me. I was at a movie theater one night, And I was going up and down the aisle getting wine coolers. And afterwards, my son comes up to me and gets in my face and he says, "Why don't you just go get drunk?" And it hit me. Everything that guy told me from AA. And then he told me at that point, I called him up and I told him what happened. He goes, "Deborah," he says, "you know where the meeting is. There's a meeting tomorrow morning. It's at San Marco. It's a club here in Jacksonville." And that was November 28th, 1984. And that's when I went that next morning and I went and picked up my chip and I've been in the meeting since. And about that time, about the same time, I met a man, not an alcoholic, met him at work, and I've been with that same guy ever since. And my sponsor was okay with him because she said she goes more on how a person affects a person. And the guy never kept me from meetings. He was a positive influence on me and my children. And we've been married now for, I don't know, 37 years, coming up on 37 years. So that was one of the first wonderful things of what it's like now and what happened to me since I got sober. Because I remember one of the first things I asked God was, I said, I don't believe, or I don't feel like you love me. I don't know much about you. I think most of what I've learned about you is not right. I can't trust all the things I think I've come to believe when I'm working those first 3 steps, I think is wrong. I think I've been taught a lot by the people in the church that I grew up in that I don't believe to be right at this point. So I said, I'm going to start over and I'm going to just have a clean page and I'm just going to write down what I know to be true today. And the only thing that I could write down is that I believe that God had to love me. Not that I feel it, but that I believe it has to be true. And the reason for that is God got me sober. God got me to AA through those series of events and those several awakenings. And the way that I ended up getting to where I got, I knew there had to be a power greater than me that got me to where I was and that got me sober. I've got too many family members that's never made it. So I know there has to be a power greater than me that loves me, that got me here. Not that I feel love, but then I asked him that one day about feeling love or knowing that God loved me. And he says, "I sent you Dan. I sent you your husband." And that was mind boggling to me because my husband treats me like a queen. I went from somebody who beat me to somebody who treats me like a queen. I had the worst husband. I have the best husband. And that's, to me, is one of the gifts I've gotten in sobriety. Now, in the beginning, though, what it's like, in the beginning, it was really hard. I dug myself up. I came in really difficult. I didn't have a car. I was riding a bike. I didn't have money. I was mowing lawns on the weekend to eat. But let me tell you something. When it come to working the steps, I knew I wasn't going to make it unless I dug in and did everything. I wanted everything this program had to give. And that movie was out at the time with Robin Williams, where he made that quote about sucking all the marrow out of the bones of life. And that for me is kind of what I felt like AA was offering. It was a way to actually get all of the good things out of life that I could. Finally, for once in my life, I wanted good things for me and my children. And if these promises that AA says that it gives you is true, I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. So I set about working the steps. I sponsor people. I chaired meetings. I did whatever it took. And it was still hard. I'm going to tell you, 7 years in, I was still having problems with trust. I've had to go to counseling on and off. I can't tell you how many times, but anytime I get stumped, I know where to go get help. If I can't get it through AA and through my sponsor, I've got counselors, therapists that I've been able to go to and get help. I've got books that I've been able to dig into and read to get help. And then I got to a period of time where, you know, after 10 years, I was able to buy a house. I had a good job. You know, I've got a good husband. The kids maybe were starting to get along better. My son was an alcoholic, but I had to get into Al-Anon some. And then in 2008, I was going along. I thought, oh, good, things are finally going along good. And I got diagnosed with breast cancer. And I'm going to tell you, that was really difficult. But, you know, the first day, the first thing that I did that morning after I got it was I got up and I went to a meeting, and the meeting was on faith. So it was like the answer was there. And the way that I ended up getting through that was going right back and doing the very beginning things again. Actually, it was not going back and doing it. It was just applying the same principles, applying those principles from the beginning, the same things. I do the footwork, the results are up to God. It was the same principles I lived by and got through all those early year crises that I did then. I applied that to getting through cancer. And it was hard. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't pretty for me. It was a new thing. It was scary for me, but I ended up getting through it by the grace of God and by people. You know, my sponsor was there, and guess my sponsor had cancer. I mean, figure that one. My own sponsor had already had it, so she was able to help walk me through it, what to expect, and they found it early, and that helped. And, you know, I was able to get through it. And then I went through another period of times where things kind of, you know, settle down and you go along and things are going good. And then, you know, I started having some other physical things going wrong. I had a problem with my knee where I went through like 3 knee surgeries, a meniscus, an ACL. And then finally they said, you know, we're not going to be able to replace this ACL anymore. We're going to have to do a knee replacement. They did a knee replacement. And then I'm in a lot of pain for that. It doesn't help. It's not getting better. Then I get a knock on my front door, and they come to the door and tell me that my niece, who's been living with me, got shot. So I'm sitting there trying to deal with that. She's okay, but I didn't know anything about it. Then I get a phone call on Sunday that my granddaughter had been out pulled by jet ski on a tube and got pulled into a pylon under a bridge and broke her upper arm straight into and almost killed her. And I'm reeling from all that. I'm in pain from my knee. I've been in pain for at that point for over a year. And in January, and my nephew at that time was living with us. All my sobriety, I've had a niece and a nephew, my sister's kids. My sister's an alcoholic. I've had her grandkids living with me on and off for the entire time. And my nephew had been living with me. We had gotten him graduated from high school. He got him signed up for the Navy, and he was in between right after Christmas. He was supposed to deploy the end of February, and he bought a scooter, one of those stand-up scooters. It was after Christmas. He was out riding his scooter, and I went to go pick up my granddaughter from school, was on my way home, decided to stop at Publix. And my husband calls me and tells me, don't go home the normal way, the road's blocked off. And the first thing I said to him was, did you tell Byron, or did you check to see where Byron was? And I said, I looked earlier, he was down at the barbershop. And he looked, and I looked at the same time, and it looked like Byron was at the end of my road. And so then Dan leaves. Dan says, I'm going around the other way and I'll come up, I'll call you. So he goes the other way, and as he's coming up the road, I'm watching him on the phone as I'm trying to get home. And as soon as he gets close to where I see Byron's phone, he calls me on the phone, and he's screaming. And he said it was Byron. It was Byron. So it turns out my nephew, he had been riding that scooter. We had told him over and over and over again. I can't tell you how many arguments I'd gotten with him about wearing a helmet and about not going too fast on it. Was going down the sidewalk. lost control of it, flew off, flew into the road, hit his head on the pavement in front of a truck, and actually killed him at the site. They ended up having to take him to the hospital, and for the next 4 days until Friday, we had to sit and watch him hooked up to all the machines until Friday. It was actually Friday, January 13th, he died. And he was 18 years old. And that was devastating. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through in sobriety. That one, I will say, cancer didn't touch that. It's been a year and I still know how many months. That one almost killed me. I really didn't want to drink. There's been a time or two I've thought I would like to check out because sometimes things just get hard. Sometimes things get hard in life. And being in pain on top of it, it's really hard when you're in pain. And then you have so many things happen at once. So I've really, really had to up things again and get in contact with people again. And it's been a rough time for me. So I've learned a lot about, working the program, and especially through difficult times. I was in a meeting the other day, and we were studying the big book in a women's meeting. And I read the best thing. I don't know how I ever missed this before, but in the big book on page 450 and 451, this guy was talking about something he learned at the very end. This is the very last of what he wrote about in his book. And I'm going to read it to you. It's just a few paragraphs, but he talked about what happened to him and how at the end he had to live in a halfway house where there were some alcoholics, active alcoholics, and something, and he lived, and it's perfect, just perfect. It's the real answer to anybody getting sober on how you live through life. But anyway, it says, big book, page 450 and 451. It says, my resentments mounted at the realization that I had flushed a career down the drain, disgraced and alienated my family, and been relegated to the meanest of institutions, a Skid Row shelter. But I was also able to realize that this bonfire of resentment and rage was beckoning me to pick up a drink and plunge into my death. Then I realized, here it is, I had to separate my sobriety from everything else that was going on in my life. No matter what happened or didn't happen, I couldn't drink. In fact, none of these things that I was going through had anything to do with my sobriety. The tides of life flow endlessly for better or worse, both good and bad. And I cannot allow my sobriety to become dependent on these ups and downs of living. Sobriety must live a life of its own. More important, I came to believe that I could not do this alone. From childhood, despite the love I experienced, I had never let people, even those closest to me, inside my life. All my life, I had lived the deepest of lives, not sharing with anyone my true thoughts and feelings. I thought I had a direct line to God, and I built a wall of distrust around myself. In AA, I faced the pervasive we of the 12 steps and gradually realized that I can separate and protect my sobriety from outside hazards only in as much as I rely on the sober experience of other AA members and share their journey through the steps to recovery. The rewards of sobriety are bountiful and as progressive as the disease they counteract. Certainly among these rewards for me are release from the prison of uniqueness and the realization that participation in the AA way of life is a blessing and a privilege beyond estimate, a blessing to live a life free from the pain and degradation of drinking and filled with the joy of useful, sober living and a privilege to grow in sobriety one day at a time and bring the message of hope as it was brought to me. And I ended up thinking at the end, that's what it's about. You know, since that time that happened, I've been able to help. I can't tell you how many people. My sponsee lost her mother. A friend of mine lost her son. So I've been able to take that pain that I had, and I've been able to help other people get through that same pain. But also for me, I was just like this guy. I told my friend, there was a guy that came to the meeting the other day, and he actually came in the meeting and sat down and said, I'm getting ready to work my 4th step, and I'm really going to need a lot of help, a lot of support. He goes, I'm going to have a hard time getting through this. I really need help and support. And I told her, I said, you know, as long as I've been in the program, that would be hard as hell for me. And I'm just like this guy that wrote in this book. I mean, for me, that is so hard for me to do. It is so hard for me to come in and share like that and say, I'm hurting so bad. I need help. That is like, I don't know, because I guess because it's vulnerable, or because, I don't know, probably because of my past. I've not really thought about it, but I've been forced to do it through not being able to handle it on my own. Maybe that's what it was all about for me. But through this, I've been able to share and help other people now and get help myself in a way I've never been able to in the past. So I can be grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that it has gotten me through all of these, because at the end of the day, I can't come and get sober and expect that all I'm going to get is good. You know, I told myself at the very beginning, I'll never forget, they never promised me a rose garden. You know, life is life. It's up and down, good and bad, happy and sad. You know, I'm going to have good days. I'm going to have bad days. I'm going to have good things happen. I'm going to have bad things happen. That's just life. It's going to happen to me, whether I'm an alcoholic, whether I'm not an alcoholic. But here I have the help of people and support of the people in the program. I have a program. I don't have to be drunk. I can be here and show up for people. And so for that, I'm grateful. And I appreciate your letting me share. Thank you.